May 1945. Across the shattered landscape of Europe, from the bocage country of Normandy to the rubble-strewn streets of Berlin, tens of thousands of military vehicles stand silent in the aftermath of conflict. Among them, a particular machine draws attention from military planners and civilian administrators alike: the Willys NB and Ford GPW, universally known as the Jeep. Britain received approximately 72,000 of these vehicles through Lend-Lease during the war years, supplemented by another 18,000 ordered directly through cash purchase. In workshops from Brussels to Bayreuth, in motor pools across liberated France, and in depots throughout southern England, these quarter-ton trucks represent both a logistical triumph and an impending diplomatic complication that would shape post-war relations between Britain and America. The moment hostilities cease, a race begins, not to capture enemy technology, but to determine what becomes of Allied equipment itself. For Britain, exhausted economically and facing unprecedented reconstruction demands, the fate of these American-built vehicles becomes entangled with questions of sovereignty, financial obligation, and the desperate need for civilian transport in a nation where private car production had ceased 6 years earlier. The situation Britain confronts in the summer of 1945 presents unique complexities absent from the usual post-war technology seizure narrative. Unlike German equipment scattered across Europe as spoils of war, these Jeeps remain American property under the terms of the Lend-Lease Act. The United States had supplied them to Britain for wartime use only, with ownership never transferring to the British Crown. Of the 72,000 Lend-Lease Jeeps Britain received, approximately 51,000 survived the war in various conditions. Another 8,500 Ford GPWs and Willys MBs purchased directly by Britain represent outright British property. But American authorities make clear distinctions between the two categories. The vehicles are found everywhere across the British sphere of influence. 18,000 remain on the European continent, primarily in Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Another 24,000 are distributed across Britain itself, whilst 9,000 serve with British forces in the Mediterranean theater. The Royal Army Service Corps faces immediate pressure from two directions simultaneously. The Treasury demands reduction of military expenditure, while civilian authorities plead desperately for transport to rebuild shattered cities and revive dormant industries. In workshops at Chilwell near Nottingham, Donnington in Shropshire, and Ashchurch in Gloucestershire, maintenance crews await instructions regarding the fate of thousands of vehicles. The Jeeps themselves range from nearly new examples with fewer than 5,000 miles to combat-worn machines requiring comprehensive overhaul. Each vehicle's fate depends on its legal status, mechanical condition, and the complex diplomatic negotiations unfolding between London and Washington. American oversight of Lend-Lease property disposal operates through the Foreign Liquidation Commission. Established in 1944 to manage surplus Allied equipment worldwide. When President Truman terminates Lend-Lease on the 21st of August, 1945, less than 3 months after Germany's surrender, Britain confronts an immediate reckoning with its obligations. Under Section 3C of the Lend-Lease Act, Britain must return, destroy, or purchase any equipment still in its possession. The United States offers Britain the option to buy its Lend-Lease Jeeps at assessed post-war value, calculated at approximately £85 per vehicle, roughly 1/3 of original cost, but still representing £4.3 million for the entire fleet. For a treasury managing the largest national debt in British history and negotiating the crucial Anglo-American loan, this sum proves contentious and adds another layer of complexity to already strained financial discussions. American negotiators arrive in London in September 1945, conducting vehicle-by-vehicle assessments at major depots throughout the country. At Chilwell, Foreign Liquidation Commission inspectors catalog 7,800 Jeeps, grading each by condition into distinct categories. Category A vehicles, suitable for immediate civilian use. Category B, requiring moderate repair. And Category C, usable only for cannibalization or scrap. The Americans press for rapid resolution, wanting to clear European depots and establish precedents for lend-lease settlements with other nations. Britain counters that fair market value for war-worn vehicles should reflect their diminished condition and the extraordinary service they provided during the conflict. Negotiations continue through autumn 1945, delayed by larger financial discussions, including the $3.75 billion loan Britain desperately needs to avoid economic collapse. Meanwhile, Jeeps continue serving British forces in Germany, where the British Army of the Rhine requires 22,000 military vehicles for occupation duties across the devastated landscape. British military retention decisions prioritize operational necessity over sentiment or nostalgia. The War Office determines that 15,000 Jeeps will remain in service with British forces, selected from the fittest examples in both Lend-Lease and purchased categories. These vehicles equip units in Germany, where they prove essential for patrol and liaison work across the British occupation zone. Another 3,000 go to Palestine, where the deteriorating security situation demands mobile patrol vehicles capable of responding rapidly to incidents. The remainder, approximately 33,000 Lend-Lease Jeeps and the British-purchased fleet, become surplus to military requirements and must be disposed of through various channels. In March 1946, Britain and the United States reach a comprehensive Lend-Lease settlement that resolves many outstanding issues. Britain agrees to pay £24 million for all retained Lend-Lease equipment, including the 15,000 Jeeps remaining in military service. The settlement values these vehicles at approximately £55 each, substantially less than the Americans' initial assessment, representing a diplomatic compromise. The 18,000 surplus Lend-Lease Jeeps still on the European continent present a different challenge altogether. Under the settlement terms, these revert to American ownership and control. The United States offers them for sale to European governments for reconstruction purposes, recognizing that these nations desperately need transport for rebuilding efforts. France purchases 4,200 Jeeps at $450 each, whilst Belgium takes 2,100 for its reconstruction efforts. The Netherlands buys 1,800 and Norway 900, each nation viewing these vehicles as crucial to post-war recovery. The remainder, approximately 9,000 vehicles, are declared surplus to all requirements by both American and European authorities. At American direction, these are collected at depots in Antwerp and Hamburg, where they undergo systematic disposal beginning in July 1946. Some 3,200 are scrapped for steel, desperately needed for European reconstruction projects. Another 2,500 are buried in engineered landfills near Antwerp, alongside thousands of other military vehicles deemed uneconomical to ship back to America. The practice, shocking to modern sensibilities, reflected the economic reality that shipping costs to America exceeded the vehicle's residual value in the post-war market. The remaining 3,300 are sold to private scrap dealers who export many to Britain for breaking, completing the circular journey of American-built vehicles. British disposal of surplus domestic Jeeps follows different patterns shaped by domestic political pressures and economic desperation. In Parliament, Labour members demand these American vehicles be made available for civilian use, arguing that farmers, builders, and transport companies face crippling equipment shortages that hamper reconstruction. The Board of Trade, managing civilian goods distribution, supports releasing Jeeps to productive industries that can contribute to economic recovery. However, the Ministry of War Transport objects, noting that Jeeps lack basic safety equipment required for road use under British regulations. They have no civilian specification lighting, inadequate braking systems, and no weather protection suitable for British conditions. A compromise emerges in May 1946 that attempts to balance these competing interests. The government establishes the Disposals Board, tasked with selling surplus military equipment through controlled channels to ensure fairness. Jeeps are offered to priority users, farmers, essential industries, and local authorities, at fixed prices designed to prevent speculation. £125 for running vehicles, £75 for those requiring repair, and £25 for hulks suitable only for parts recovery. The scheme launches in June 1946, with 8,000 vehicles available for immediate purchase. At the Ruddington Depot, near Nottingham, queues form before dawn as buyers arrive with cash and lorries, eager to secure these valuable machines. The first allocation exhausts within 3 weeks, demonstrating enormous pent-up demand. By December 1946, the Disposals Board sells 19,000 surplus Jeeps, raising £1.9 million for the Treasury, a significant contribution to post-war finances. Agricultural users purchase nearly half of all civilian Jeeps, valuing the vehicle's four-wheel drive for farm work in muddy conditions. Construction companies buy 4,500, whilst 2,100 go to county councils for road maintenance duties across Britain's deteriorating infrastructure. The remaining 6,000 surplus domestic Jeeps undergo systematic disposal between January and August 1947 through various methods. Some 2,200 are sold as scrap metal, yielding approximately £18 per vehicle for steel, aluminum, and copper content. Another 1,800 are cannibalized for parts to maintain the Jeeps retained in service, extending their operational lives. The final 2,000, deemed beyond economical repair, are buried at former military sites including Bicester, Trivenham, and Longmoor, where they join thousands of other vehicles in engineered disposal pits that remain undisturbed today. The 15,000 Jeeps Britain retains in military service prove remarkably durable despite their wartime use. Throughout the late 1940s, these vehicles serve with the British Army of the Rhine, in Palestine until the 1948 withdrawal, and in Malaya, where the emergency begins in June 1948. The Jeep's reliability in tropical conditions makes it invaluable for jungle patrol work against communist insurgents. However, maintaining an aging American fleet presents escalating challenges as the vehicles enter their second decade. By 1949, spare parts become scarce as American military stocks dwindle and production shifts to newer models. The War Office establishes a dedicated workshop at Ashchurch specifically for Jeep overhaul, where skilled fitters strip vehicles completely, refurbish components, and rebuild them to extended service standards. Some 4,200 Jeeps undergo this comprehensive overhaul between 1949 and 1952, extending their service lives by 5 years. Meanwhile, British automobile manufacturers desperate for export markets lobby the government to replace American Jeeps with British-built vehicles that would support domestic industry. Austin produces the Champ, designed specifically to replace the Willys Jeep in British service, whilst Land Rover markets its Series 1 as a superior alternative combining ruggedness with British engineering. The War Office begins phasing out American Jeeps in 1952 as Austin Champs enter service across various units. By 1956, only 3,800 American Jeeps remain in British military use, primarily in reserve units and training establishments where their simplicity remains valued. The final British military Jeeps are withdrawn from service in 1962, sold through government auction at Ruddington and Donnington. These late survivors, well-maintained and low mileage, fetch premium prices from civilian buyers, averaging £180 each, testament to their enduring utility and robust construction. Preservation of Britain's wartime Jeeps occurs almost entirely through civilian retention, rather than institutional collection by museums. British military museums in the 1940s and 1950s focus on preserving British-designed equipment, viewing American vehicles as temporary wartime expedients unworthy of permanent display in national collections. The Imperial War Museum acquires a single Willys MB in 1947, displayed briefly before being relegated to storage where it languishes for decades. The Tank Museum at Bovington shows no interest in preserving Jeeps, considering them insufficiently significant compared to tanks and armored vehicles. Consequently, Preservation depends on civilian owners who purchase surplus vehicles and maintain them for practical use on farms and in businesses. Many agricultural Jeeps survive decades in farm service, their robust construction and simple mechanics ensuring longevity even under harsh working conditions. By the 1970s, military vehicle collecting emerges as a serious hobby in Britain as veterans seek to preserve machines they remembered from service. Enthusiasts begin searching for surviving wartime Jeeps, discovering examples in barns, fields, and scrapyards across the countryside. Some remarkably complete vehicles surface, including several still bearing their original British Army registration numbers and unit markings that allow researchers to trace their wartime service. The Military Vehicle Trust, founded in 1978, estimates that approximately 800 wartime-era Jeeps survive in Britain by 1980, most requiring restoration to working condition. Restoration efforts accelerate through the 1980s and 1990s as parts availability improves through specialist suppliers serving the growing American collector market. British restorers develop particular expertise in returning vehicles to authentic British Army configuration, researching correct paint colors, markings, and equipment fits through period photographs and documents. Several restored examples achieve exceptional historical accuracy, including a 1943 Willys MB restored to represent vehicles used by the Special Air Service in Northwest Europe, complete with period weapons mountings and wireless equipment that recreates their wartime appearance. Today, approximately 1,200 wartime Jeeps are preserved in Britain, roughly 2% of the vehicles originally supplied through Lend-Lease and direct purchase. Of these, perhaps 300 represent genuinely wartime survivors rather than post-war imports from America brought in by collectors. The Bovington Tank Museum now displays 2 restored examples in its wartime vehicle collection, finally acknowledging their historical significance. The Imperial War Museum Duxford maintains 3 Jeeps, including one restored to represent vehicles used during the Rhine crossing in March 1945. The National Army Museum in London exhibits a 1944 Ford GPW that served with British forces in Palestine during the turbulent post-war period. The legacy of Britain's wartime Jeeps extends beyond preserved examples and museum displays to influence post-war vehicle development. These vehicles profoundly influenced British military vehicle development throughout the post-war decades, establishing performance benchmarks that British manufacturers struggled to match. The Jeep's combination of mobility, reliability, and simplicity created standards that shaped an entire generation of utility vehicles. Austin's Champ, despite technical sophistication, including independent suspension and selectable four-wheel drive, proved mechanically complex and unreliable compared to the straightforward Willys design. Land Rover's commercial success, by contrast, stemmed partly from emulating the Jeep's honest simplicity, whilst adding weather protection and load capacity British users demanded for their specific needs and climate. For historians studying Allied logistics, Britain's Jeep fleet illustrates the complex aftermath of Lend-Lease, demonstrating how military aid creates long-term diplomatic and financial obligations that extend far beyond wartime cooperation. May 1945 initiated a race to capture German technology, but it also began a quieter reckoning with Allied equipment itself. For Britain, those 72,000 American Jeeps represented both lifeline and liability, vehicles that helped win the war, but now demanded payment from an exhausted treasury. Of the thousands that served alongside British forces, barely 2% survive today. Yet those preserved examples connect us tangibly to the soldiers who drove them through Europe's liberation, serving as monuments to Allied cooperation and American industrial might.